6:25 early this morning, saying hello to our guest, Ittay Flescher, who's in Jerusalem, and Jaime Aronowitz, who's also in Toronto. We're going to get started in 1 minute. Okay, well, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Saul Ship. I'm a board member with the Canadian Friends of Peace Now in the Toronto chapter. I'll be assisted today by my fellow board member, Jaime Aronowitz, who will be taking questions later on. So Canadian Friends of Peace Now is the Canadian partner to Shalom Achshav, Peace Now, which is Israel's leading peace movement, and which promotes the two-state solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. You can find out more about us on our website, which is peacenowcanada.org. We hope you'll consider supporting us with a donation if you haven't already done so late last year. You can do that via the donate page on our website. The organization relies entirely on donations from people like you, as does Peace Now in Israel. Later on, we'll have time for audience questions. Please type your questions at any time in the Q&A section, which normally is at the bottom of your screen on Zoom. Please make your questions as concise as possible. And if you wish, you can also mention your name and where you're from. The webinar will be recorded and will be posted on the peacenowcanada.org website in a couple of days. So we're delighted to have as our guest today Ittay Flescher, who is the Education Director at Seeds of Peace Jerusalem, formerly known as Kids for Peace. And you may have heard it as that in that name. He's the author of a new book, which is called The Holy and the Broken, A Cry for Israeli-Palestinian Peace from a Land That Must Be Shared. Congratulations to Ittay. This book has been shortlisted for the 2025 National Jewish Book Award. Ittay was born in Israel and grew up in Melbourne, Australia, then moved back to Jerusalem as an adult, where he now teaches high school and in youth movements. He's also still the Jerusalem correspondent for the Jewish Independent of Australia, and has written articles in many publications, including Haaretz and Jerusalem Post. So without saying any more, I'm going to get into the first question for Ittay. So to begin with, Ittay, can you please tell us how you got into the work of peace building that you're doing with Seeds of Peace, and what motivated you to do that?
Thanks, Saul, and it's wonderful to be here with you all this evening, my time, morning, your time in Canada, and also just appreciation for Shalom Achshav being one of the veteran Israeli peace organizations that have done so much to put the agenda that peace is possible in front of so many people around the world. So it's a pleasure to be speaking to you all tonight. So yeah, as Saul mentioned, I was born in Israel. I grew up in Melbourne. I was a leader in a Jewish youth movement for 15 years, teaching Australian history, Jewish history, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, Hebrew, Tanakh, many many subjects to teenagers in Australia, both Jewish and non-Jewish. And then in 2018, I moved to Jerusalem, and then since then I've been working as a journalist and a peace educator. And the first job that I had in Jerusalem was with an organization called Kids for Peace. That's actually my first ever dialogue that I'm facilitating there with my co-leaders in Hebrew and Arabic in Sheikh Jarrah, which is a neighborhood in East Jerusalem, which is where we were once located. That was our office there. And since then, I've probably sat in over 1,000 hours of Israeli-Palestinian dialogue, both for teens and for adults, and it's greatly shaped my life, and it's shaped the book that I've written that I'm going to be speaking about tonight. Specifically, the organisation where I work now, Seeds of Peace Jerusalem, is a product of an event that happened in 1993. I'm sure you're all familiar with this famous handshake on the White House lawn, but a photo I'm assuming probably most of you haven't seen before is just after that handshake. There were 46 children from Seeds of Peace for their first ever summer camp in the United States. Their children in the background there are from Egypt, from Jordan, from Israel, and from Palestine. And Seeds of Peace was founded by John Volach, and he was a journalist in Washington at the time. And at the time, he was seeing politicians trying to make peace, making handshakes, signing agreements, and he thought, what chance is there of peace if there isn't also children who are being educated and raised to have these values, the values of sharing the land, the values of tolerance, the values of understanding. And so that's where Seeds of Peace came about, as a need to sort of complement the top-down peace building that was done in Washington, that there should be a grassroots movement. Since 1993, over 8,000 alumni have gone through Seeds of Peace programs now, not just from the Middle East, we're also active in South Asia as well. So it's really a global movement now, teaching skills of dialogue and humanization and empathy around the world. I'm specifically working now in Seeds of Peace Jerusalem. So these are the children that come to our regular programs that happen on Thursday evenings. And as you can see in this photo, we have, children that are religious Muslims, religious Jews, religious Christians, secular as well, Druze. We have Armenian kids. And the idea of Seeds of Peace Jerusalem is to be a space where all of these children can come together, can talk to one another, can ask each other questions, can share their identity, and have hope that another way is possible. The staff that lead Seeds of Peace Jerusalem are myself and Lana Alkalan, with the two education directors. Lana is Palestinian, lives in Beit Hanin, and is also a very close friend. And then we have two leaders for the seniors and two leaders for the juniors, meaning that every child can learn, with children their age in a grade that's suitable for them. And a lot of what we do in our dialogue is storytelling through games. So we have lots of activities here. You can see in this picture an activity where we got the children to cut up different pictures from newspapers and to make a chart that shows their identity and their vision for the coming year based on the pictures and the headlines they were seeing. And that prompts a dialogue about what kind of Jerusalem they want to live in the future. And for me, doing this work is a real privilege, and I'm very grateful that I'm here tonight to be able to talk about it.
Okay, great. I was expecting you will hear more about the programs in a little while. My first question for you is, how is the national conflict being taught now in the schools? First of all, in the Israeli schools, Israeli public schools, in the Israeli Arab language schools, and also in the Palestinian Authority schools in the West Bank. I presume you also have students from the West Bank.
Yeah. So maybe just for those that aren't familiar, neither Israel nor Palestine have what I would call a public school system. Public meaning that everyone goes to the same school system with the same curriculum. In this country, all education is ideological from kindergarten. meaning that if you're Haredi in Jerusalem, you'll go to a school with only Haredi children, and it will be single sex from kindergarten. If you're a religious Zionist, you go to a Mamlachti Dati school. She's only a religious Zionist, obviously very strong education towards serving in Tzahal, keeping Shabbat, Kashrut, learning Torah, all of those sorts of things. If you go to a secular school called Mamlachti, your education will emphasize things like, LGBT rights and the environment and gender equality, and we'll have some Torah study, but more from a cultural perspective. And then Palestinians, so in Jerusalem, some go to UNRWA schools, some go to private church schools, some go to schools run by the Jerusalem municipality that teach the Israeli curriculum. And everyone gets their own history. Everyone gets taught in their own language. We don't do the same exams. We don't learn in the same language. Even the name of the country we live in Jerusalem. So all the Jews will say they live in Israel. All Palestinians will say they live in Palestine. I remember once at Seeds of Peace, we did an activity where we asked every child to draw the map of the country where you live. And all of them drew the same map, as in they all drew, from the river to the sea, and the Jewish kids called it Israel, and the Palestinian kids called it Palestine. Not a single kid drew a green line, because none of them had ever seen it before. It wasn't in any of their maps. It wasn't in any of their schools. Even living in Jerusalem, most of them have no idea where the Green Line is. It's on, Road 1, which separates Rehov Yafo from the old city where the light rail is now. But you can walk across it and you have no idea that you're going from east to west Jerusalem, even though the UN obviously regards East Jerusalem as occupied territory. People that live here don't know that. And so what we try and do is, in addition to learning about their identity, we also ask them a lot about what they learn in school about the other. And as you can imagine, post October 7th and post the destruction of Gaza, there's very little positive being taught about the other side in schools. In Israeli schools, there's very much an emphasis on encouraging military service, encouraging pride in Zionism, in Jewish history, in the eternal belonging of the Jewish nation to this land. In Palestinian schools, there's obviously a story of oppression, of Nakba, of colonization, but also a story of Arab and Muslim presence here, well predating Zionism, to Zahir al-Omar, which I write about in my book, in the 17th century, but all the way back to the first Muslim conquest of this land in the 7th century. So I think both textbooks teach a kind of like exclusive version of history, that this is our land and our land exclusively. There are now some reforms. I just read in the Al-Quds newspaper today that there were some changes to the Palestinian textbooks, especially about how Jerusalem is described, that they're now describing Jerusalem as a city of 3 monotheistic religions rather than just as a Palestinian city. That those reforms are coming, at the behest of the European Union and the Trump 20-point plan that is conditioning, funding and support for the PA, especially in its rule in Gaza, to reforms in its education curriculum. I haven't seen any reforms in the Israeli curriculum since October 7th, but they're definitely things that I would welcome, because I think education is so important to peace. Because if you are being taught that this land is only yours and anyone else in this land doesn't have the same right to it as you, then that is, from a very young age, a recipe for violence.
You didn't differentiate between the East Jerusalem schools and the or Israeli Arab schools and West Bank schools. So presumably under the Palestinian Authority, the curriculum is very different from what it is in the
So in East Jerusalem, they do the same curriculum as the West Bank, which is, it's called the Tawjihi, and in the Israeli schools they do something called the Bagrut. That's the Arab schools as well. So Arab schools in Israel, what's called 48 Arabs, they are learning Yehuda Amichai poems and learning about, they're learning nothing about the Nakba or the Palestinian narrative in any school that is, under the Israeli Education Ministry in the Arab stream. And then obviously the schools in East Jerusalem and the West Bank would be learning the Palestinian narrative.
So would you say that in the Israeli Arab schools, they're learning what you mentioned in your book called the dual narrative? books,
No,
textbooks?
in Israeli Arabs are learning exactly what Israeli Jews are learning. They're learning the same curriculum. They're not learning anything about the Palestinian narrative in Israeli schools.
Really?
That's the 21% of children who are Arab in Israel. They're learning, yeah, the classic Theodor Herzl, Shai Agnon, Yehuda Amichai, all of that. Yeah.
So tell us about what is a dual narrative that you write about in your books.
Yeah, so there are 7 hand-in-hand schools in Israel. They're schools that are joint with Jews and Arabs. There's only one high school, which is called the Max Rain School in Jerusalem. So they teach a dual narrative, meaning they teach both Israeli and Palestinian history and identity, and they have space for all the religious festivals, and they teach in Hebrew and Arabic. And Seeds of Peace Jerusalem is very much modeled on that. So we also, in our programming, teach all versions of history. We teach about all the festivals. When we eat, the food is kosher and halal. We're trying to model what peace looks like. And I think at the moment, it's very threatening for many Jews to learn Palestinian history, because there's a feeling that if I learn or teach Palestinian history, I'm essentially saying my history is wrong, that I don't belong here. And for Palestinians, they feel like if they learn about Zionism and the Jewish connection to this land and the context of the pogroms in Russia and what led to the 5 Aliyot and all of that story, then they are denying the Palestinian and Muslim Christian connection to this land that they would say goes back all the way to Muhammad and also to Jesus even. And so the history here is not we're not just studying about the French Revolution or something that happened in the other side of the world. We're studying about something that matters fundamentally to who we hear, and I understand why there's a fear to teach that history, and why Israel even passed a law banning the teaching of Nakba in any institutions that receive government funding. I understand why there's a fear of doing that, but I also feel like if you believe that this land could be shared, you can't share a land with a people that you have no understanding of why they're here and why they belong here. And just because I teach another's history, it doesn't mean that I think it's right. When I was a teacher in Australia, I taught about the Vietnam War, and I gave the Australian perspective. Australians fought in the Vietnam War, but I also gave the Vietnamese perspective as well. And I didn't do that in a way to diminish Australian soldiers or their bravery or heroism, but you can't understand the Vietnam War if you don't understand the position of the Vietnamese and Viet Cong and communism and everything that was involved in that. And teaching another side doesn't mean you're legitimizing it. It means that you're doing it because that's how you teach history, and that's how you teach a well-rounded identity. And I think another problem of not learning the other's history and not learning why this land is important to the other is you often think that what you say is very reasonable and sensible, and what the other says is insane. And the reason you think that is because you have no historical context about why someone feels like they want to return to a piece of land. Because, let's say I live in Ashkelon. I didn't know that it was once called Ascalon, and I don't know there was a Palestinian history there. So I have no idea why Palestinians would want to return there, because I think it's just a Jewish city. It's always been a Jewish city. It's mentioned in the Tanakh. So there's no, what are they interested in this place for? Same for Jews that are interested in places in the West Bank. There's tombs of Kever Yosef, Kever Rachel, etc. Obviously, all the tombs in Hebron, they're very important in Jewish history. But if you're denying or undermining that history, you don't understand what a Jew is looking for in those places. So even before we get into the political debates, which I'm sure we'll do very soon, you have to understand who you're living with and why this land is important to them as a first stepping stone to ever sharing it.
It all makes sense, but how do you get to that end? Is it come from the top, from the bottom, from both?
Right. So as I said, there are some changes the PA is making, but they're very much being forced to make that. I don't think they're doing that of their own choice. The Israeli curriculum since the election of this government of Netanyahu has gone more and more right wing. Like there's less fun. Even like organizations like the Parent Circle that would come into schools and do workshops on shared bereavement are not allowed into schools anymore. So there is a clamping down on organizations that do sort of peace advocacy being allowed into schools. because people don't want that. People don't want to hear that. A lot of Israelis that maybe did believe in peace after October 7th are a lot more skeptical of peace organizations now. And I think it's on us to make the case about why the vision that we're advocating for and the way we're doing it is not only going to help bring peace, but will also help bring safety and security. Because I think no one can think about what's going to happen in 10 or 20 years' time, which is a lot of what peace organizations talk about. Everyone's thinking about what's going to make me safe tomorrow, what's going to make me safe in my home, what's going to stop me from getting kidnapped or for a rocket to fall on my head, or if you're Palestinian, what's going to stop my house from getting demolished, or the checkpoint from being closed again, or police coming in to raid the shops in my neighborhood because they don't like the way we're paying tax or not paying tax. So I think these immediate concerns often override the long term. But I guess the argument that I would make is if you want to change something in the short term, you first need to have a vision for where you want to go into the long term, and you have to start building that. And building that is a slow and painful process. But what I try and do in the Holy and the Broken is A, make the case for that, and B, explain how that can happen from the reality we live in today.
So you are doing this through your organization, Seeds of Peace, and I'm sure you're not the only such organization working in Israel and in the West Bank.
No, so we're part of ALMEP, of the Alliance for Middle East Peace. The Alliance for Middle East Peace includes over 160 organizations, including Shalom Achshav, Peace Now, including Combatants for Peace and the Parent Circle and the Jerusalem Youth Chorus and the Hand in Hand School. And there's a joint basketball team and there's a joint football team and there's a women's group called Women Wage Peace and Women of the Sun. And I'm sure you're familiar with many of these organizations. So collectively there's over 10,000 people in these programs for different age groups, different demographics. Some happen in Gaza, in the West Bank, in East Jerusalem, in Israel. We've also come together under this coalition called the It's Time Coalition, where we have these mass events. There's been one in Menorah Arena, one in Jerusalem. And what we're trying to do is not only just build a constituency for peace, but help people who are in this movement feel less alone. Because often people like me that work in these organizations, we speak to our family and our friends and they tell us we're insane. Like they say, you're mad. Like, what are you doing? Why are you talking to our enemy? We need to fight our enemy. Our enemy is never going to change. They're always going to want to kill you. And even if they're nice to you now, they'll stab you tomorrow. That's and it's the same with, many Palestinians will say any meeting with an Israeli, especially from East to West Jerusalem, is tatbiyah, is normalization. You can't meet with your occupier. We need to resist in any way. And my argument is peace building is resistance. Peace building is saying, I refuse to accept the current reality and I want to build an alternative to show people that we can cooperate and share this land.
And how do you see a way into the future through the government, through politics, or strictly through a bottoms-up mass movement?
Yeah, bottoms up is often what I say when I drink a l'chaim. But so bottom-up peace building is very. I'll share a story. There's a story I mentioned the Vietnam War before of A.J. Must. So he was an opponent of the Vietnam War, and he would every Friday he would stand outside the White House, whether it was rain, hail, or shine, with a candle by himself. And he did this before there were mass demonstrations against the Vietnam War. And he would sit there by himself. He was a frail old man with a candle, with a little sign protesting the Vietnam War. And a journalist once asked him, and he said, "What are you doing here? Like, you're just here with a candle. You think the White House is going to leave Vietnam because you're there with a candle?" And he's like, "No, I am fully aware that nothing I do is going to change anyone in the White House. I'm only standing here because I don't want them to change me." And I feel like what we're doing in Seeds of Peace is, I'm very well aware that we're a tiny organization that has zero ability to affect the governments of Gaza, of Ramallah, or of Jerusalem. I'm well aware of that. But us meeting together and us learning about each other in Hebrew and Arabic and celebrating each other's festivals and humanizing one another is the equivalent of holding a candle. It's showing that we want to be close to the light, and we want to say we refuse to accept the the racism, the discrimination that is so much a part of the fabric of this land. Don't want to accept that. And so coming to this is saying we want to be the seeds that will grow into peace. Now, in order to make that change happen, we need to be much, much larger than we are now. But we're starting to do this work, and together with the other ORMEP organizations, I hope that we'll grow and that eventually we will become mainstream, because that's the only way to end this cycle of bloodshed.
Yeah, in the book, you talk a lot about peace processes around the world and Northern Ireland and Europe and Asia. What one of the points that was interesting you mentioned is that a study of peace processes found that in the last 25 years, 35 years, that agreement was substantially more likely to be reached when women played a significant role in the solution. Can you say something about that?
Yeah. So
Is that happening at all in either Israel or in Palestine?
it's not. You probably know that the Oslo Accords had almost no women involved. The negotiations of the past year to free the hostages had no women involved as well, not on the Israeli or the Palestinian side. And I think it's essential that negotiations have men and women around the table, because if you don't have women around the table, that's 50% of the ideas of ways to end war are not at the table. And if you look at the Northern Ireland peace process, where there were two women it was initially involved in a car accident, but then they turned this car accident into a peace movement that was calling for the Troubles to end over 15 years before the Troubles actually ended. I think it's super important that war and peace not only just be men and army generals talking about this. There's actually a poem in my book by Rachel Goldberg Poland, who lives in the neighborhood next to me in Baka, whose son Hirsch was kidnapped and then killed by Hamas after he was a captive for over 300 days. And at one point, she gave a speech outside the UN called "To the Boys in the Room," and it's a metaphor for little boys talking. And what will you do when your mother comes home? Because you're talking and you're not achieving anything. And she sort of imagines in the poem what would happen if all the negotiations to end the war were being done by mothers in Gaza with hungry children and mothers in Israel with hostages held by Hamas. And she assumes that it wouldn't take them, 600, 700, 800 days to come to an agreement. And I think she's right. And so I think one of the reasons, there were many reasons why this war went for far, far too long. But I think one of them was the absence of women in negotiations. And I think that should definitely change going forward.
I didn't prepare this, but I'm wondering the role of the media in both sides, both the mass media, television, newspapers, and social media. Do you see any progress? I mean, other than Haaretz and perhaps other English language media like Jerusalem Report, Jerusalem Post, are you seeing? How do you see a way forward, both in Hebrew and in Arabic and in social media?
Yeah, so the media obviously is a huge contributor to both generating empathy and generating hatred. When I remember once I follow all of the Palestinian media and the Israeli media, and I remember it was like 2 or 3 months into the war, where Israel wasn't letting in sufficient aid, and so many countries, Jordan and Egypt, started airdropping aid into Gaza. And I remember at one point seeing a video where they dropped this huge bundle of tons of aid, and it all sort of smashed on the floor. And then there were kids taking individual pieces of pasta and putting it into their pockets so that they could, bring something home for their parents to cook for them that night. And you could see them, how many pieces of pasta can you fit in your hand? And I thought, how hungry must you be that you have to run into an open field and collect individual pieces of pasta? And you could watch a video like that and become incredibly angry at Israel. You can become incredibly empathetic for these families. Or can become incredibly angry at Hamas for creating this situation. You can become incredibly angry at the occupation. You know, you can watch a video like that and you can do lots of things with it. I watched thousands of interviews with hostage families, and I heard about how beautiful these people were and how they loved to sing or play piano or what football team they went out. And when the hostages came out, when I was at the hostage square, people were crying and celebrating as if their own child had come home. Now, these people we've never met before. We didn't know, none of these people were famous before October 7th, and then they're more beloved than, you know, the greatest singers and artists and musicians and football players in the country. So that's the power of media. Media can do incredible work at humanization, and it can do incredible work at dehumanization. And so I'm not one of those people that says turn off your phone and stop watching the media. No, media is very, very important, but it needs to humanize people. It can't dehumanize, and it can't cause you just to sit there and to hate. Because if that's what it's doing, then it will just perpetuate conflict forever. And so, in the same way that I think, you know, we don't let a child drive a car before they have driving lessons, I'm a big believer that people should have smartphones and people should have access to social media, but they have to learn how to use it first. And we in Seeds of Peace, just last week, we did a full seminar on media literacy, on how to read media, how to read headlines, how to understand the media you're consuming, who makes it, how it's made, how it's shared. Because I think that's a very important step to building peace, is to understand how media can cause you to hate the wrong people and to think sometimes to think the bad guys are the good guys as well. But also how to create a narrative of harmony, and that this land belongs to everyone.
And do you think that a lot of this is driven by the political authorities, by the government?
Yeah, I mean, the government is a mirror of the people. So the reason the government is very right wing is because the people are very right wing. The reason why, you know, after October 7th there was a lot of support for Hamas is because a lot of Palestinians in Gaza felt like resistance was the only way to end the siege and to free Palestine and to liberate the yoke of occupation. So you get the leadership that reflects, you know, the people that are there. I think now, after the war, Hamas is deeply unpopular in Gaza, and after the horrific way the war was managed, Netanyahu was deeply unpopular in Israel. And in 2026, there's meant to be elections in November for the Palestinian National Council, and in Israel there's meant to be elections in October for the Knesset. And I think 2026, it's the first year in my life where both nations are having elections in the same year, a month apart. And I think there's a huge opportunity for both nations to choose a politics that no longer only sees violence as a way to resolve conflict, and to choose a politics that places diplomacy and non-violent communication at its heart. And again, that's what I've been advocating for as long as I've been doing this job, and I hope that's what people choose. I think in the Israeli discourse, so much of the discourse is about Ken Netanyahu, lo Netanyahu, you know, do I like him or not? And then you sit in a coalition about that. And the real questions that I think we should be asking now about developing a constitution, you know, developing an agreement with our neighbors, making sure that Gaza becomes a place that's free and thriving. Like, these should be the heart of our political debate, and they're not even questions people are talking about, because everyone's just talking about Bibi, nobody, Bibi, Haredim. Like, I feel like the politics of Israel has just gone back to October 6th, and it's forgetting to ask the really important questions, not about our immediate day-to-day, but how do we put in place steps now that make sure that what happened over the last 2 years to Gaza and to Israel never happens again?
Yeah, one of the things that we wonder about in the Jewish diaspora, we probably are a bit more liberal than the average Israeli, but there's definitely a lack of understanding of what you try to point out in your book, which is that the both peoples have a connection to the land and a right to and see it as a homeland. Uh, can you just expand on that for a minute, just so that we can understand what you mean by that?
Are you asking about the A Land for All?
Yeah, yeah. Well, whichever. I mean, we think I presume that a lot of the people on this call are Jewish, and we think that it's our homeland. The Arabs have a lot of other homelands. Why do they need Palestine?
Yeah. I never understood that argument. It's like me saying, in Canada, you speak English. And in Australia, they speak English as well. So it's like me saying Canada and Australia. Well, Canadians can just move to Australia. You all speak English. But, maybe you do speak English, but like you don't have anything in common beyond that. Like your culture is obviously French, and you have that thing with ice hockey, which I don't understand. And in Australia, there's the whole, the cricket and the Vegemite and whatever. And an Arab who lives in Jordan, and an Arab who lives in Egypt, and an Arab who lives in Saudi Arabia, just because they speak Arabic doesn't mean they're part of the same nation. Each has its own distinct dialect of Arabic, from Morocco to Algeria to the UAE to Kuwait to Iraq. And each also has its own national identity and story. And the Palestinian nation has its own connection to here, to Al-Quds and to Al-Khalil, to the olive trees, obviously to the coast, to the oranges grown in Jaffa. Like, this is all part of the Palestinian story. It's not part of the Jordanian story. It's not part of the Egyptian story. It's part of the story that happened here. And I think the importance of learning history and going, in the book, I actually write about what I learned by visiting different Palestinian museums, which is something I recommend a lot of Jews do if you haven't done it before. Because you need to understand that, the belief that Palestinians are really just Egyptians or Jordanians or, some other culture, or that Jewish Israelis are really just, don't belong here and should just all go back to Germany or to Poland or, someplace in Europe where many of us came from, after the pogroms in Russia and then again after the Holocaust. It totally misunderstands history and misunderstands our connection to this place, and it misunderstands how our nationalism developed. And so, again, understanding that history and teaching in a way that says we both belong here is a key ingredient to enabling a future where we're no longer at each other's throats. There are many, many countries in the world where people of different ethnic and religious backgrounds coexist. Why do they coexist? Because they've found ways to do it. One of the best examples in my lifetime has been this thing called the European Union. Europe saw 2 horrific world wars with hundreds of millions of people killed and a genocide of the Jewish people in the Holocaust. What did they do after that to make sure there wasn't a World War III? Okay, it took them 20 years, but they created a European Union, and they said, there's going to be a France, there's going to be a Germany, there's going to be a Switzerland, and each is going to have its own language and its own culture and its own identity and its own curriculum, and they're each going to tell their own story, but they're going to also have a common identity. They're going to have a common currency. They're going to live under this thing called the European Union. And the solution that I favor in Israel-Palestine is called a confederation, where, like the European Union, there would be a shared government for both states, and there would also be an Israel and Palestine that would still have their own identity. And the reason I believe that it's necessary for there to be this shared government overseeing Israel-Palestine is because both countries are too small and too independent from one another to separate completely. And if they separate completely, I think it's just a recipe for more war. This is I don't want to see this going towards a divorce. I want to see it going towards a marriage. Now, it might initially be an unhappy marriage, but I think in time, this place can be a thriving place that the whole world comes to for tourism and for inspiration. And I mean, can you imagine how many people would want to see what this land looks like when there's peace? This is a war that everyone in the world knows about, that everyone thought was intractable. And when there's peace here, I think I think just so many people will be fascinated. So many people will make movies and write PhDs about us, and look at the heroic people that decided to put all this bloodshed behind us and create something new. And that's the movement I want to be a part of.
Yeah, you mentioned in your book, but that I something that certainly not in the Jewish consciousness, probably not in most Israelis' consciousness, that the existence of the other people in the land is desirable in building
Yeah.
more liberal and intolerant nations. And uh, I actually that's something that's pretty difficult to understand for many countries. I mean, we espouse that in Canada because we have two nationalities, but I don't know how many people really believe that it's a an asset.
Mm. Yeah, like so. Again, I think Canada is a good example. Australia is also an example of multicultural societies where the story is one of immigration, and immigration is a positive thing. And now you can see in your southern neighbour, they are now telling a different story, that immigration is something that is a negative thing, and that immigrants need to be rounded up and arrested. And each nation tells a story, and you tell that story through the national day that you have, and through the pictures that are on the walls of your classrooms, and the constitution that you hold by, and the rights that you enforce or don't enforce for other people. And um, I didn't write a chapter on my book, but 3 months ago, I was in South Africa, and when they ended apartheid, they didn't just stop one law. They created an entire country. They made a new flag. They made a new anthem. They changed all the street names. They changed the textbooks. They changed the anthem. The South Africa before 1994 and after 1994 is not the same country. And I think when there's peace between Israelis and Palestinians, this country will look entirely different, because so much of our identity is tied to conflict and to war and to self-defense, and all the things that consume life here so much. And again, it's a very, very hard thing to imagine. Again, which is why I wrote the book, because I think you need to tell people what peace looks like, because it's so scary now, and it's so foreign when you've been living in war for so long, that you first need to have a dream, and then you need to develop an action plan to make that dream a reality. And again, going back to South Africa, Mandela and the ANC, they wrote the Freedom Charter already in 1965. It was 35 years before apartheid ended that they started dreaming of what a free for South Africa would look like, and then that obviously became their constitution after apartheid ended. And South Africa still has a long way to go. It's not a country at peace at all today, and Northern Ireland still has a long way to go. But there's very few people in South Africa that want to go back to apartheid, and there's very few people in Northern Ireland that want to go back to the times of the Troubles. And there's maybe aside from the UK, but there's most of the EU also wants to hold on to the EU because they see the power of having that unity and having that shared story. And so I think you need to tell the stories of how peace benefits millions of people every day, and despite the fear and despite the changes that it's entail, it's a risk worth taking.
Okay, great. I think we're ready to move to audience questions. I think there's a number of them that are there. So I'm going to hand it over to Jaime have you got some questions ready, Jaime?
Yes, there are a few questions from the audience. Thank you, everyone, for typing your questions. Rather than asking question and answer, I group them in categories, so Ittay will be able probably to answer more than one question at a time. Okay, so at some point we didn't touch the political aspect of the conflict, right? So one of the questions that are coming here from the audience are in the following. Okay, what are who are the leaders that you can see in both sides, the Israeli and the Palestinian side, who can take this approach and try to make a difference in what's happening today? But my question the way I would like to rephrase it, maybe you can answer it both ways, is rather than just specific individuals, maybe you can highlight some of the characteristics of the leadership approaches within the Israeli or the Palestinian societies that you believe are essential for creating this type of new partnership for peace?
Yeah. So, firstly, there are some leaders, but they're not really in power at the moment. But people like Rabbi Gilad Kariv on the Israeli side, I think, continually says very similar things to what I'm saying, speaking about the importance of having a religious voice for peace, talking about coexistence, talking about the importance of placing the future of Israel's relationship with the Palestinians at the heart of the next election, condemning settler violence, those sorts of things. Samran Sinjwali, who's been very involved behind the scenes as a sort of alternative to Mahmoud Abbas in the Palestinian Authority, and I think he's spoken in Canada before as well, is doing a lot of work about telling a new Palestinian story that has a place for Jews in this land, while also holding on proud to his national identity and his national story. But beyond those two individuals, I would say that it's essential that the characteristics that we need of leaders are the characteristics that are in the children of Seeds of Peace. Empathy, understanding, love, joy, appreciation, people that want to see their neighbours feel safe and thrive in this land, and people who don't see this as a zero-sum game. Because as long as you see the world as either it's mine or it's yours, you're going to fight. And as if you're coming into this conversation not with the intention of how do I expel you, but how do I share this land with you, then the conversation is entirely different. So what I need is people to start asking the right questions. And the right questions are questions that focus on how can we make this a place that is good for everyone, and not seeing my happiness or my security coming at the expense of someone else's safety or freedom.
Okay, thank you. That's great. Another question or type of questions, also coming as a comment from one of the comments that Saul just made about the Jewish diaspora. So a question here is reflecting on how the attitudes of the Jewish diaspora have shifted since October 7th. So how can the voices of the Israelis and the Palestinian teams that you are working with can be shared more broadly? I mean, honestly, I never heard about Seeds for Peace before a few weeks ago. I'm sure that many people in the audience
I'm from
the same.
Texas.
Oh,
Yeah. Sorry, no, go on. I just want to show you something. Keep going.
okay, perfect. So how can we share within our other audiences, our friends and family, more about the work that you guys have been doing, especially with the diaspora communities, so you can be heard, understood, and also supported at the end of the day?
So I just wanted to show, this is our website, seedsofpeace.org. You can also find us on social media, on Instagram, if you search Seeds of Peace Jerusalem. There's a lot of photos, videos, stories, testimonies from children there that have gone through our program from around the world. So instead of just posting another horrific video of someone suffering, post videos that show what the future looks like. You can find them on Seeds of Peace. You can find them on the AllMep website. You can find them on the Hand in Hand School. Show on social media what you want to see. The other thing is I've created a website that accompanies the Holy and the Broken. It's ittay.au. And there's a tab there called What Can I Do? And there's 3 things that I think diasporic Jews can do to help support a peaceful reality here. The first is to learn how to dialogue. I think since October 7th, many people who care about this land find it very, very hard to talk to people they disagree with. And then that leads to obviously a more extreme diaspora, and leads to a more extreme reality here as well. And so I put in a lot of examples there of how to talk to people. It could be a member of your family, it could be your boss, it could be someone that maybe you went to school with that you're no longer able to have a conversation with them, and to use those tools to role model what you want to see in this land, to role model in your own life. The second thing is deepening understanding. It's very hard to have a dialogue if you and I don't have the same facts, because all that will happen in the dialogue is that you will share your history and I'll share my history, and it's like a dialogue of the deaf. And so I think an essential rule for dialogue to be a success is you have to have some sort of shared pool of data. where you agree on certain common facts. And to do that, you need to learn, and the person with you needs to learn as well. And in the section on my website of Deepening Understanding, I've put lists of books, of podcasts, of films, of all sorts of resources that you can watch together. You can do a book club, a film club. There's Israeli authors, Palestinian authors, but using those resources so that you have the same pool of data is really important as a second step. And then a third step is taking action. So I've listed many organizations that you can support financially, that you can visit when you come to this land, that you can also in your own country hold a vigil, hold an event, hold a movie night, hold a screening, things that I imagine a lot of things that Canadians for Peace now are already doing. But all of those things can make a difference to create a more peaceful reality, both in your country and in mine.
This is great, thank you, because there are more questions asking for specific examples or techniques that are being used on the ground. So I don't want to put you on the spot if you would like just to provide one or two examples, but I think that the resources that you're sharing here are great. You had a video, I think, or something that you wanted to share.
Yes. So I had a video that I wanted to show you that I thought it's about America, but I think it sort of relates to it. So this is obviously a mock. Maybe I'll just show it to you, Jaime, and you respond to it. We'll do this as an exercise with the two of us. Just tell me how you feel at the end of this video, okay?
I'm from Texas.
Trump supporter.
But I live in California now.
Democrat.
But I'll admit the taxes are terrible here.
Libertarian.
Because they made it to where I can't afford a new smart car.
Green Party.
And I wanted to use that car. I wanted to storm the Capitol with that car.
Fascist.
To peacefully protest in the parking lot because I believe in equality for everyone.
Communist.
But mostly I just wanted an affordable way to get my kids to school.
Tradwife.
Okay, so Jaime, Saul, because you're the only two I can see on this call, what do you feel or think as you watch that?
So the first reaction is a lot of stereotypes, right?
Yes.
Even a short phrase, a few words, it just triggers our mind in a way that we already know or we think how to respond. We are not actually listening. This is the person, the man in this case, he's not actually listening. He's trying to think how to respond. So he's not engaging with curiosity. He's not trying to learn. He doesn't want to understand the other side. He just wants to know how to respond.
Yeah.
And that's a paradigm that we, at some point, we have to break. We are not always trying to defend ourselves or to impose our position. The whole idea is just to come with a bit more of a curiosity to understand the other side, because maybe we will not convince each other, but I can learn something about the other side and be more thoughtful next time when I have a conversation.
Yeah. And I think, you know, we in this land, we see someone, we see a kippah or a hijab or peyot, or they say Torah study is important to me, or resistance is important to me, or defending Israel is important. And then we all already assume, you know, a whole range of beliefs about them and about their families and about their history with one sentence. And what dialogue is it says basically, and if I had to summarize it in 3 words, when I encounter a belief that I find challenging, or that I find racist, or that I find abominable, I don't say, get out of my face. I always say, tell me more. Tell me, why do you believe? I think that thing you said is obscene. How on earth did you come to believe that? And you get some fascinating answers when you start approaching that question like that. And then you understand that the people that don't agree with you just have a different life story to you. They just went through a whole lot of life experiences that you never went through, and that's why they have that belief, or they have a very different pool of data than what you have. Now, when I've done dialogue with people I don't agree with at all many, many times, on the far left, on the far right, and I don't leave the dialogue ever agreeing with them. And very rarely do I say, okay, I'm now going to, become a violent person and not work for peace anymore. But what I do is I have empathy for how they got to believe where they are, and that helps me understand how I can help them, if they want to, find a path that allows them to share this land together. But if I don't have that empathy, then there's no way I can talk to them, because no one wants to talk to a person that's berating them and treating them like a child. And I think that's what this interview shows. It shows that there's one sentence and that's it. You're written off. You're a trad wife. You're a communist. You're a fascist. You're a whatever. And dialogue is the opposite of that.
Yeah, that's very true. Thank you very much. So I have just a personal question, a comment, and then a question also from the audience here. So I was in a talk a few months ago with Israeli-Palestinian, Mohammed Dawarshi. I hope I pronounced his name correctly. And he was telling that for us, the Jews, of course, we know the story of Abraham sacrificing in our Moriah, in the Moriah, and it was Isaac who was supposed to be sacrificed.
Yeah.
For the Islam, it's exactly the same story, but it wasn't Isaac, it was Ismail. So it doesn't matter if I'm trying to convince you or not, or if I bring my facts or my holy books. Each people has their own narratives, and we have to understand that they are coming from different perspectives, and we don't have to convince each other. We just have to understand that they're having different narratives.
Absolutely.
That's my personal comment. Questions also from the audience regarding your book. Is it publicly available? And
yes, yeah. So the book it's published by HarperCollins. It's on the HarperCollins website. It's on Amazon. It's on Barnes and Noble. It's on about 100 different Canadian bookshops. It's in independent bookshops. Also on my website, ittay.au. There's specifically a link of all the places you can buy it in Canada as well, or in the United States or in the UK, depending on which country you're from. So yeah, it's a very widely available book. It's also available as an audio book if you want to hear me reading it to you. It's also available as an ebook or as a Kindle. It's available in many libraries as well. So yeah, just wherever you happen to be living, search The Holy and the Broken and my name, and it will come up. And I also, if anyone does want to read it and wants to invite me to a book club, I'd be happy to. I regularly speak at book clubs who are reading it. Israelis, Jews, mixed groups. I've spoken to church groups that have read it as well, and I think it's a book that's meant to start conversation, and so I hope that is something people will read and take to heart.
Okay, I think this is great. I don't think I have many other questions from the audience. We are getting to the top of the hour.
Yeah, I have another one. If you're probably the most difficult one. You write, I know that one day we will share the land in peace. You write that, and you're at the end of the book. What makes you believe that? You're one of the very few people that believes that.
Because I know Israelis and Palestinians are better than this. I just know, I know so many good and kind people here who have, and I see them every day in Seeds of Peace and many other. We have every reason in the world to hate each other, and we don't. I think Israelis and Palestinians are two of the most creative and resilient people I've ever met in the world, and we have a deep love for our children and for living life to the fullest and for enjoying, every moment, every second, every beautiful thing in life. And even our advocacy, I know it's the opposite, but actually so often we're saying the same things in reverse ways. And I think our zest for life and love and marriage and family and all of these things means that when we choose to share this land, this will be one of the most remarkable and stunning places on earth that everyone will want to see and visit and be a part of. And the reason I believe that is because I see it already on a very, very small scale in all of these organizations in OLMEP, and that I want to live in a reality where what I see in my bubble is what everyone sees. I want to add just one other thing about that I put on my slideshow. Next month, I'm going to be traveling to the United States, where I'll be speaking at the J Street Convention. They have an author's corner there where they're featuring a number of books. So if anyone here is going to be in Washington, D.C. on March 2nd, I'll be there. And then if anyone on this call is in the US, these are the dates of all of my public events in several cities across the East Coast. Again, on my website, ittay.au, there's a link to register for the event in the city where you want to go. So, yeah, I'd love to encourage people to invite friends and family and be a part of the conversation that I'm trying to generate through this book, because I think that so many people that come to speak from Israel or Palestine often are not talking about peace. They're often, sharing a very pessimistic message about how war is inevitable and how things are only going to get worse, and that's so much of what consumes the both the Israeli and Palestinian diaspora in terms of their discourse about here. And so, if you are looking for something different, this could be a place to hear that.
Excellent.
And might I add that this webinar will be on the Peace Now Canada website in 2 or 3 days, and I encourage everyone in the audience or who's watching this secondhand to tell your friends or family about the webinar, to have them look at it on our website, or to go to ittay.au. They can get much the same information.
Yeah.
Jaime, any more questions that you would like to pose?
Just one more related to the information that Ittay just shared about his tour in Eastern US. There is a comment from the audience. Would you come to Canada after US commitments and have a talk?
Yeah, look, well, let's have a chat offline. But yeah, I actually have a brother that lives in Toronto, so I've got a lot of reasons to visit Canada. So we'd love to visit there. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. Thank you very much to the audience. Thank you for your questions, and thank you for also the moderation, Saul. Thank you, Ty. I'll let you do the final remarks.
Yeah, well, thanks, Ittay. This was really very inspiring and actually quite revealing. I mean, we think very pessimistically about the Israeli-Palestinian situation, and you're giving us some hopes. So thanks also to you, Jaime, for the audience, handling the audience question, and thanks to everyone who participated in the webinar. Please remember that our donations to Peace Now Canada are what keeps us going. So please go to our website and stay tuned for our regular webinars, which are held on a monthly basis. And we are also participating in a conference which is taking place in April. And all that information will be found on our website, peacenowcanada.org. So thanks again, Ittay. Thanks, Jaime.
Thank you.
Goodbye to everybody.